Welcome to Elixir Mix, your weekly Elixir podcast talking with members of the community. My name is Mark Ericksen, and on our panel today we have Eric Oestrich.
Hello.
Michael Ries.
Hello, friends.
And Josh Adams.
Yo.
And today we are joined with our special guest, Wojtek. Wojtek, can you kind of give a little introduction to yourself?
Hi. So I'm Wojtek. I'm a member of the ECTO and Hex core teams in the Elixir community, and I'm also working at Plataformatec, where I'm working on ECTO and Hex and some other open source projects, and I'm working with clients as well. Besides that, I'm based in Kraków, Poland, and I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io.
Great. Well, thank you for coming. There are a few, so you had a recent blog post kind of announcing that the move of Hex.pm, which I think everyone in the Elixir community is hopefully familiar with, to using Elixir releases. And so we'd love to talk about that, and that's moving to Elixir 1.9. We'd love to dig into that. And also just want to talk about, you haven't been at Plataformatec too long ago. There was the August of last year was the blog post announcement saying that you joined the Plataformatec R&D team. So we'd love to hear a little bit about what your experience has been like. Are you working in the office? Are you remote? Kind of what's that like for you?
Sounds great. Should we start with the Hex stuff, or?
Well, let's start with the Plataformatec.
Absolutely. I've been working at Plataformatec for a year now. Our R&D team is remote. So I'm working remotely from Kraków, Poland. And as I briefly mentioned, I work mostly on open source projects like ECTO, Hex, and some others. And I also work with clients as well. And I'm happy to elaborate on our R&D team and things.
Yeah, I would love to know what is are there particular types of projects or repositories that the R&D team is tasked with maintaining? Do you guys just pick anything in the Elixir ecosystem to work on? What's kind of the mission of your team?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our high-level goal is to have the most impact positive impact on the community, and that's where we kind of choose our projects to work on. Two of the projects that come into mind that we've worked on since about last year was, my primary project up to this point was MySQL, which is a new driver for MySQL database. And another project that kind of came out of the R&D team is Broadway, and related projects around that, like the SQS connector, RabbitMQ connector, and things like that. And besides that, so that would be our kind of primary projects, I would say, that we worked on. Besides that, we maintain ECTO. I help with maintaining Hex, Elixir itself.
There's a lot of great stuff that I'd love to talk about with all this, and I hopefully we can fit it all in today. But so the main reason we wanted to bring you on is to talk about Elixir 1.9, and I think people would love to hear about. I know I would love to hear about Hex.pm and just how is this hosted? And I'm sure you get a lot of volume as people have deployment pipelines and everything, and they're all downloading packages constantly. So I'm just curious, like, what's the service like? Kind of, if you can kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and kind of let us know what's going on behind the scenes.
Sure. So Hex.pm is deployed on the Google on Google Cloud using the Kubernetes engine. And that's, by the way, where the releases came in as we deploy it with Docker. As far as volume, to be honest, I don't think volume has been a problem recently. It basically just works. I know Eric is probably screaming inside a little bit, but yeah.
So I would love to know just a little bit about, there's a release, a main Hex.pm release that lives in one Docker container. How does that work with other things in Google's cloud? Like, do you store the compiled packages in cloud storage? How do those get talked to? Can you share a little bit about kind of the rest of the system around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We publish Docker images. We run the containers in the cloud. Maybe I will talk a little bit more about the architecture, kind of like what Hex.pm is composed of. So there is the Hex.pm, which is the web service. So that's the web interface and the API. Besides that, we also have Hex docs, which until somewhat recently was basically just static file hosting for the docs. Since about a year ago, that component got a little bit smarter when we introduced private Hex docs. So as of now, Hex docs is also an Elixir application. We needed to make it an app to handle authentication. Besides that, we also have billing component, which is closed source at the moment. That's also for the private packages feature. And finally, we also have Bob, which I don't know if you heard about. So Bob is just a little project that handles a lot of automatic stuff that we kind of have to do for Hex and Elixir. So for example, when there is a new Elixir release, Bob picks that up and creates the tarballs, creates documentation, and stuff like that. So yeah.
Yes, I actually use Bob, and I'm trying to find the link to, hopefully we can put in the show notes to where you can actually see the web page for it, where you can see all the different releases. One of the things I find most helpful for people, for myself, is like I'm using Visual Studio Code, and it has like plugins that will let it do kind of dialyzer style analysis and give highlighting when it finds problems. But in order for that to work, you have to have the Elixir version and the OTP version compiled for each other. And it's available on the Bob website, which is like a play on Bob the Builder,
exactly
the little kid show guy. And so I'm able to just say, like, I use ASDF for downloading, for version managing my Elixir and Erlang, and I'm just able to say ASDF download, install, and then a specific Bob built version that has both the Elixir and OTP version bundled together, so it works great for me. So yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, so we could point that out to people.
So just one more comment about that. So Bob also handles builds txt file where there's a list of all of the builds. You can programmatically access that. And as you mentioned, there is also a website that someone created, which looks really nice.
Yeah, I love your usage of the word Bob there. I in a previous company had worked on a system which cross-compiled a bunch of C++ code for different targets, and we named it Bob. And I got teased a lot at that job for referencing a children's cartoon in my project name. And then when I heard about Bob, your project, I sent links to all the people who used to tease me at my old company.
That showed them.
So maybe just one more thing about that. We haven't open sourced it yet. We are just getting started with it, but we also have a small project called Wendy, which is another character from that cartoon. So she's like, I think like an inspector or someone. And the idea behind that project is to inspect some things related to Hex. We haven't really gone far yet, but I was pretty happy with the name of the project, I guess.
Yeah, nice.
I had another architectural question about Hex. Do you know if you're running the Kubernetes node or pods inside of a deployment or a stateful set?
I don't know, honestly.
Okay.
So Wojtek, one of the questions I would love to hear is kind of when you came to Plataformatec, was that your first jump into Elixir? Had you been doing Elixir before that, or kind of what's your language background?
Sure. So I've been working with Elixir professionally for, I would say, a year and a half before joining Plataformatec. And then before that, that was more of a hobby, I guess. Before that, I have a Ruby background. I worked with Ruby and Rails, and back in the day, PHP.
I'm still recovering from my PHP days. It's good I'm glad you made it here, Wojtek.
Yeah.
Well, should we dive into a little bit about the releases and how they got used for Hex.pm? One thing that I would really love to know, just kind of before we dive into any details, is what was your overall experience in terms of moving from a distillery release to a mix-based release?
That's a good question. I think my overall experience was pretty good. Honestly, I don't think there is a huge difference between distillery and Elixir releases. So, for example, if you already use distillery, switching to Elixir releases is not it's not difficult at all. Because you have already solved all of the you have already laid the foundation for releases in your project. And in terms of my experience moving Hex to use releases, I think the most annoying part was just getting the Docker image for 1.9 RC. Mm-hmm. Now that the stable version is out, it's really easy. Besides that, I would say one other kind of annoyance was around running tasks like migrations, which I know is which I think is also kind of maybe a little bit pain point for distillery. With Elixir releases, there is an eval command that on the release script that you can use to run any code, and so that's what we use. Over time, we on the Ecto project, on the Ecto side of things, we've also made it easier to be able to run migrations from releases. So on Ecto 3.1 or Ecto SQL, I guess there is a new Ecto SQL with Ecto migrator with migrations function. I will send a link later. But it basically starts the repository, starts the applications, all of the stuff that you otherwise might have to do before, and now it's handled by Ecto.
That's super nice. But once I had it working the first time, I just copied and pasted it.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I think I just copied from the distillery docs the release tasks like module that you dump in, and there's like 5 things that are just kind of like, well, that's there, so I'm just assuming that needs to be there. So having a module that is already built into Ecto SQL seems like it'd be pretty nice.
Yeah. So Bitwalker or Paul Schoenfelder was kind of the lead on distillery and managing that project. Was he involved with the design of releases?
I'm not super familiar with that. I think he was, but it kind of goes without saying that we probably wouldn't be here without Paul's work on the distillery. So obviously, we are all very grateful to him.
Indeed, he does a lot of stuff. So I had a similar situation that you kind of outlined there, Wojtek, with I as soon as Elixir 1.9 release candidates were out, I was like, let me see if I can build and try playing with releases. And then I hit that snag of, I don't have a Docker image that I can pull from, and I'll have to build from source or something. And that was really what kind of slowed me down. But yeah, now that it is official, people can be easily playing with it. The Docker images are available. So how would you encourage people to start playing with it? Is like, are there any tips or tricks that you would say, you probably just want to start over here and, just change it and see if it compiles? Like, where would you tell people to go?
With releases, right?
Yeah. And just moving to Elixir 1.9, I guess, let me ask this question. Like, I assume it seems like there's no problem to run Elixir 1.9 and still be using distillery, right? I can move to 1.9 without making any other changes.
Yes, that's correct.
So that makes it easy as a kind of on-ramp to get onto 1.9. And then, okay, so now I'm ready to move presumably from distillery to releases. What's the first step I would need to do?
I would say, I guess there are two options. First option is just run mix release and see if it works. It probably works out of the box, to be honest, just because distillery and Elixir releases are using slightly different files in the rel directory. So the Elixir releases have the EEX template files, whereas distillery has the one without the EEX. So they basically wouldn't be picked up automatically. But I would honestly just try that. Also, what you can do just to get started with releases, I would just create a new 1.9 project and just run release, mix release init and mix release. You don't have to write any code to get started with releases. It's super easy. And finally, I would really encourage to look at the documentation. The documentation for releases is really comprehensive, and I think it's I think it's a really good resource to get started.
I will second that. The documentation is very good, especially when I was looking at it and it was like pre-release. It's like it wasn't even fully released and the documentation was still high quality.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in to say I've started switching some of my side projects to 1.9 releases, and I haven't deployed it yet, but it's like a total of like max 4 hours to like go from distillery or 1.8 distillery to 1.9 distillery to figuring out you got to update your config providers a tiny bit. And then like it's at least compiling and building, and I'm getting a release out. I haven't deployed it yet, but it seems like it's good.
And that's where you want to have like a staging or sandbox style environment, right?
Yeah. The downside or that's the bad side to hobby projects is that staging is not free. So
true, but I guess if it's a hobby project, it's like people have to deal with potential short outages.
It's very true.
The other day, my blog went down and somebody actually tweeted at me about it. And I was amazed that somebody had actually tried to read my blog. So I assume that I must have had a link somewhere on the internet, probably in a Stack Overflow comment.
That's awesome that they were even able to figure out how to contact you when they couldn't access the blog, which presumably told them how to contact you. Well, Wojtek, I would love to take a sidetrack and kind of talk a little bit about like the Elixir, the new MySQL library that was developed for Ecto. And I'd love to hear about kind of the motivations behind it and, anything you can kind of give us like some reasons, like why was this change needed and what was the goals?
Sure. So MariaX is actually one of the older projects in the community. And since MariaX was released, a lot of things happened in the community. So, for example,
so I think I just noticed that the MariaEX project, I don't know that I ever really paid attention before, but it's not an official kind of Elixir project, right? It's a community run one. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So MariaX is a community-run project, which then so one of the reasons that we started with a new one was exactly because it's a community-run project, and so there is a big backlog of things that aren't being worked on, like bugs and stuff like that. And we can't really blame them because they are volunteers, and we are already extremely grateful for all of the work that the contributors of MariaX have done over the years. And so with MySQL, what we wanted to do is to kind of on one hand kind of take the project off their back, but also ensure that we are able to maintain the project very well, respond to issues quickly, and
that makes sense, because like just looking at like the Postgres official, like it's under the ElixirConf GitHub organization, and so I hadn't really thought about that. But you have the difficulty of like, we want to give MySQL users a good experience being able to use Elixir, and with it's a community-run project, as awesome as that may be, we don't really have influence and can't come in and like kind of fix up all the things. So
exactly. And as you mentioned, Postgres has been there since a long time ago, but which goes back to one of the goals of our R&D team at Plataformatec. People also run MySQL, and so what we wanted to give them is a really good experience, and kind of continue to give people good experience with MySQL, and that's where the Plataformatec involvement comes in with sponsoring that project.
Nice. Now, I haven't used the MySQL library yet, but I do have a project that is migrating a Rails database to an Elixir one, and so it's migrating. So it's kind of like during the migration period, we're accessing some of the models in a MySQL database, and some of them are in a Postgres database. If I wanted to migrate from the Maria EX library to the MySQL, are there any gotchas or any, or is it a drop-in replacement? Kind of what should I expect?
One of the goals was to exactly be a drop-in replacement, and I'm biased, but I think we did a pretty okay job in that. We did on the project. We do have MariaX. We have a MariaX compatibility page where we list all of the differences between the two drivers. That's on the GitHub repo, and so you can see where we deviated from what they did before.
I am both super grateful that someone is building the MySQL driver, and also very much hope I don't ever have to use it. So I'm in a weird spot here.
Yeah, I'll second that.
I can see everyone's laughing with that, but they're just muted. But yes, I understand. Like, Postgres is a really great database. I love it, and that is my first choice to go to. So I don't know that we covered this, but is Hex.pm, is it using Postgres behind the scenes? And I'm assuming it's the Google Cloud provided one. That's
correct. We are using Postgres.
Yeah, that's how I have everything set up, just using the sidecar, and it's super easy to get going.
So you mentioned the R&D team again, and I was curious what other kinds of projects that you work on in the community, or be the internal projects, or how's the R&D team run? I would love to hear about that.
So I guess I already mentioned MySQL and Broadway, and again, these would be the two major projects that we worked on. We have some internal projects, but we are not ready to talk about them yet in public.
When you are, we'd love to hear about them here.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure. I guess on the R&D team we have a lot of flexibility what we want to tackle. But again, we always try to look at the projects that we want to tackle through that lens, how we can give the most positive impact on the community. Yeah.
Is some of that driven by, because you mentioned you work with clients as well, is some of the like recognizing a business need and then saying, well, this really does make sense to be something that's more general that we could make be a open source library? Is that part of what kind of drives some of these the developments?
Yes, that's a great point. So this may sound a little bit cliche, but I think this situation that we have with working a little bit with clients, but also on the open source projects, keeps us honest because we don't, because we also live in the real world with our clients that are actually using our libraries. So one of the things that exactly came from that situation was Broadway. So people were using GenStage for a few years, and when we were working with clients, we started to seeing some of the problems over and over again, and that's where the Broadway project came about. Basically, encoding these best practices and providing even more features on top.
Very cool. Yes, I have watched presentations, José Valim's talk about Broadway, introducing that, and I'm not currently on a project where I need that at the moment. I will be using that in the future, I know. But that is I was working previously with GenStage and had some of those exact problems that Broadway solves, which in my case was you're in a Kubernetes or deployed environment where you have rolling deploys. So you need a clean way to shut down your GenStage and kind of drain the worker pool in a clean way, let them all finish their tasks so you don't just get something dropped halfway through. And that's one of the solutions that Broadway brings, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are even more features. So I'm not the best person to talk about Broadway, honestly, but one of the other features that is really useful is batching, which really can dramatically improve performance with things like acknowledgements. But yeah, the draining of the queue that you mentioned, that was by far the most common occurrence where people just didn't do it. Yeah.
Yeah, in my case, I didn't know I needed to do it. Right, I just didn't think about that. So that is I'm grateful that you guys do have that real world client experience, because you are seeing people where they have these problems, and that informs the design. So it's not just like these ivory tower academic solutions. It's like, oh yes, well, it should work perfectly for you. You shouldn't have any problems. You're just using it wrong. It's like, well, I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think it works really well where maybe we get some feedback from the clients, and then we kind of incorporate that back to the ecosystem. A few weeks ago, I actually had a little bit of a reverse situation, which was basically Eric ran into some problem in a library on Hex. And so we talk on IRC and things like that. And he just asked a question whether someone ran into this particular issue. And I remember that a client ran into that issue, so I had an answer for him. So yeah, it worked pretty well.
I would love to know about what percentage of your time on the R&D team do you think is spent with clients? Because I think this is a really amazing situation where Plataformatec, clearly Plataformatec over the years has invested a lot into the Elixir community. And it's really amazing that they're turning this into a sustainable business practice that they can continue to support the further developments in Elixir. So, is this like a 50-50 time with clients and open source? Does it just depend month to month?
That's a good question. So it basically depends. So it's like Broadway or GenStage. It depends on demand. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself there. But we do try to spend at least 50% time on open source. In some weeks, it might be we spend 70% and stuff like that, but it changes. But yeah, I would say half and half is probably a good.
Also, do you know, you mentioned that you don't work as much on Broadway, but do you know, does the Broadway project have a lot of end-to-end kind of testing? I imagine that things like making sure you drain queues correctly might be something that's difficult to unit test. And I'm curious if your team has any testing best practices around those kinds of things where it's sort of concurrency related, or maybe it's hard to write into a unit test.
Yeah, so I don't yet have a ton of experience on Broadway, as I mentioned, but I was actually fixing a couple of bugs recently, this week actually, and I would say the test suite is pretty good in terms of being end to end. So I'm almost sure that there are tests for that. Yeah. One thing maybe worth talking about with regards to end-to-end testing is where is if you are getting data from some other sources, like for example like Amazon SQS and things like that. Now your end-to-end tests would now does your end-to-end test is actually talking to SQS. I actually ran into this problem not that long ago. So by the way, so this is a bit of a tangent, but as one of my contributions to Hex recently, we are. So I mentioned we have the Hex docs, which is an Elixir application. It actually uses GenStage for kind of working with the Hex API service. So basically, whenever someone uploads a docs tarball, so the Mix client, when you do Hex publish docs, the X doc generates the docs. We tarball them and send them over. And basically, initially, all of that stuff was handled by the Hex application. But since we moved Hex docs into a separate application, we had an opportunity to move some code over, and we also had kind of operational concerns there. So by moving the docs handling to Hex docs, we offloaded a lot of stuff off of the API. But in any case, I was actually recently moving, replacing our GenStage pipeline with Broadway on Hex docs, and so. And by the way, there's gonna be a blog post about that pretty soon. You heard that here first. But yeah, we actually ran into that end-to-end situation when we were running the tests. Like, well, do we try to connect to SQS during the tests? So we didn't want to do that because of all sorts of reasons around networks. And stuff like that. So what we are working on currently is just to have a dummy producer that doesn't do anything. So it's not gonna pull jobs from anywhere. Instead, Broadway already ships with a kind of testing API. So there is a Broadway test messages function that kind of puts an event into the pipeline, and so we kind of can end-to-end test there. So I guess your question was about end-to-end testing Broadway. I kind of went on a tangent to end-to-end testing your own application that uses Broadway, but maybe it kind of makes sense.
No, I think that's exactly what Michael was trying to get at. Like how can we test that as a user of the library? So that's awesome.
I would also love to hear about MySQL, because I think that's a case where because you're writing the library, you might want to actually run a copy of MySQL and connect to it. And I would imagine you probably connect to a few different versions of MySQL as part of the test suite. Can you share just a little bit about that test suite?
Yeah, absolutely. So you are Correct. So one of the challenges with the MySQL driver was exactly to handle different versions. They support different features of the protocol. One of them doesn't support this particular one. The other does, and stuff like that. So what I ended up doing is on my machine, I only have one version. I think it's 8. But I also set up I basically use the Docker to test against different versions locally. So in the repository, there is a Docker compose file with, I think, at least 8 versions. And I added some scripts to be able to run tests against all of them, or a particular test against a subset of the versions and things like that. So yeah, I would say supporting all of these different versions was pretty challenging, but I would say that the Docker, being able to run them in containers was extremely helpful. Maybe another thing worth mentioning with regards to testing on MySQL was, again, different versions have different feature sets, and using XUnit excludes and includes was extremely helpful. So whenever there is a feature that may have varying support, we tag it in our tests. And so in different scenarios, we may run the test suite without specific tags. And what we do is when we start the test suite, we kind of figure out basically figure out where we are, like what's the version, what kind of the features it supports, and then we build a list of excluded or included tags in the test suite, and then the test does the rest. So I would say that feature of XUnit was extremely helpful for building a test suite in a library that needs to support different situations.
Nice. Yes, XUnit is awesome. I really like it. It's a great testing library, and I love that it's part of the core system. So one of the other kind of fun topics that I think is just interesting is you wrote a library some time ago called OOP, and but it's an Elixir library, and you actually presented on this. And this was like before you were actually doing full-time Elixir work. But maybe you could just kind of I think people should check it out, because we'll put a link to it in the show notes. But it is, I'll kind of give the little tagline, like it's a GitHub project. It says, are you tired of all those modules, processes, and function nonsense? Do you want to just use classes, objects, and methods? If so, use OOP, library in Elixir. And it's like each one's got like, footnotes. And the footnotes are like,
like don't use it, like don't actually use it,
yes,
or something.
Yeah, like
if I recall.
Yeah. Like, so the first footnote on OOP is like, actually, I love this because this is true with Alan Kay. Actually, according to Alan Kay, the inventor of OOP objects is the lesser idea. The bigger idea is messaging, and he'd gone on to say, like that what we have with C++ is not what he intended with object oriented. It's more about messages. But also that you're like, don't actually use this library. But it's a very complete library. And it's like, could you just kind of walk people through like what made you want to do this, and like what was, I don't know, because it's funny. It's like you've done, and how is it actually working behind the scenes?
Right. So the reason that I wrote the library was I was really curious if I would be able to, and because I was, I think. It was very interesting to me that Elixir metaprogramming kind of features allowed to build kind of a language, like not really, but kind of, So the library was definitely a wild experiment in that. But well, first of all, I learned a lot about macros and stuff like that. But also it was interesting to try to implement some of these crazy features that I had there, like inheritance and stuff like that. So I remember. So as I mentioned, I have background in the Ruby community, and I remember. I think it might have been one of Gary Bernhardt's Destroy All Software episodes about this kind of idea that like if with languages that have metaprogramming capabilities, if something is not a syntax error, you can make it work. And that was definitely with this OOP. If I was able to write this class something, do define methods and stuff like that. If that wasn't a syntax method, I knew that I could make it work. I also vaguely remember there was actually a Destroy All Software episode on writing an object, kind of like a class syntax from scratch. I also remember that Avdi Green worked on some related stuff. But yeah, that was a fun project to work on, and I gave a lightning talk that I was, and people seemed to enjoy that. So that was fun.
I know my coworker and I, like when we've hired somebody new or something, or just kind of want to show them, it's like, yeah, look what you can do with Elixir, and because Alan Kay and object-oriented programming is actually closer to Erlang, and so it's we've used that not in terms of using the library, but using it as a reference and just kind of a fun little kind of a joke. But there is a more serious library that you wrote that was very helpful for me years ago. There was it's on your GitHub, but it is called Acme Bank. And what this was is an example umbrella project, because this was like 3 years ago.
Yeah, so I prepared the project for a talk that I've given at ElixirConf 2016. So basically it was me exploring the umbrella project features and some different ways of structuring Elixir applications. That was also just around the time that Phoenix contexts were kind of in discussions. So I got a chance to talk with Phoenix team around these topics as well.
Yeah, I just found it very helpful because like when you're first trying to understand umbrella projects and like where, because you have contexts, and I've worked with people where they've tried to basically something that is a context that is like a business context, like it is part of their core logic. They're trying to move that into a separate umbrella application, and it was just not appropriate because they still wanted all these relational entities, and just they were putting the line in the wrong place. And so it's really helpful for me to try and understand what does make sense for where do the pieces go. So yeah, that is a talk that people should definitely check out if they're trying to understand, kind of getting their head into umbrella projects. But this project, it hasn't been touched in 2 years. Let it stand on its own. But it was very helpful for me in understanding and kind of getting my head in there. And if you look through the closed issues, you'll see one of my questions in there, which you answered. So.
Oh, wow. So maybe I just wanted to add one more thing about kind of why I created this project. And what I wanted to do is to have a project a little bit, which is just a little bit more than a hello world, but maybe not so huge that you can't really, that you can't really understand it or something. So when I was first starting with Elixir, when I first got really serious about Elixir, what I was doing, I was looking at Hex.pm, and so kind of looking for how it's doing things, how it's using Phoenix or Ecto and stuff like that, and I kind of wanted to do a little bit similar thing with the Acme Bank, to have a project that people could look at, that they could run locally, try to deploy, things like that. What was kind of helpful about this project was that I could, whenever there were like new features with regards to umbrellas in Elixir, I had a project handy that I could test them against to make sure that makes sense, that they work, stuff like that.
And I should also mention, if people want to look at the code for Hex.pm, it is an open source project that they can download and actually, kind of browse around if they're trying to understand a real world project. And this is not an umbrella project, and which is just a testament to me that not everything needs to be an umbrella, right? Some things it's just fine to be a Phoenix app and just kind of have it well organized within there.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, well, there's the old adage, pick the right tool for the right job. So definitely, as of right now, I don't think Hex.pm has to be an umbrella. Again, some of the other projects that we have in the ecosystem, like the Hex docs, that's not even a Phoenix project. That's just a plug. That's just using plug, and that's okay.
Yeah, I actually was also really impressed. Earlier, you mentioned that HexDocs for a long time wasn't even an Elixir project. It was just statically compiled HTML, which is amazing. I really loved that that there's a design aesthetic within the Elixir community that includes a lot of these core teams, which is about kind of a minimalism where we'll try to solve the hard problems and we'll try to provide a really good experience for you, but we're not going to be very opinionated on how you structure your application. And there's a spectrum there. Some projects have more opinions than others, but I really love the fact that the Elixir community encourages people to explore. One other question I had: when is there going to be an R&D project around pimento cheese, or have you just not announced it yet?
That's a great question. This may or may not be one of these projects that we are not quite ready to talk about yet.
Pimento cheese, like the actual cheese.
Oh man, the teasers in the Elixir community right now are so strong.
All right. Well, we are coming up on our time and we don't want to keep you too much longer, but is there anything else you wanted to mention on any of these topics that we've already covered that you think we should at least talk about a little bit more?
I think we covered the material pretty well. I guess what I would say is with Broadway in particular, where our focus is with creating connectors. And so if you really need a connector for a particular source, definitely let us know. Same with Broadway and with stuff like Elixir releases. I would encourage everyone to test these new features and to give us feedback on them. And finally, I guess maybe one more thing with regards to Hex.pm is, as I mentioned, Hex.pm was one of the projects where I started to get serious about Elixir. And so to me personally, what was extremely helpful was that Eric was extremely nice to work with, kind of helping with my first steps in working on the project. And so and I think Hex and many other projects like that are very friendly to newcomers, and definitely with other projects, but in Hex in particular, we really encourage new contributors, new contributions. There is always a lot of stuff to do, but I also think it's a pretty cool project to work on, exactly because you can kind of see, because it is an open source project that is non-trivial, so you can see a lot of real world problems that it solves. But at the same time, if you add a feature to Hex, that may actually have a big impact on the community because a lot of people are using it.
True. And I know, speaking of Hex, you had a recent feature that you added, and here's the link to the pull request in the show notes. But I think it was the ability to diff between different library versions.
Yeah, exactly. So that's so between when we thought about adding this feature and now, as you may have heard, there was another issue. So this time in the Ruby community, one of the packages was owned, I think, strong password.
Yes.
And so the idea behind the diff feature is to be able to basically run mix hex package diff and the name of the package and 2 versions and see exactly what is changed between the contents of the actual package tarbles. So you can browse what exactly changed between the versions, and hopefully you will. In the worst case, you will avoid getting owned. But in general, we encourage people to check what they are updating to, making sure that they are aware with the basically that they are that they are updating to the right things, that they handle dependencies well.
I did hear about that, and I included a link, but you can just kind of Google for it, where the strong passwords gem, basically in the Ruby community, the maintainer, he lost control of his GitHub account, I believe. It was his Hex. It was his
Ruby Gems account, I believe.
Ruby Gems account, yes. And so someone put up a malicious version, which wasn't in the source code, like in the GitHub source code, and being able to diff. It was a very astute and aware person who went and took the initiative to say, well, there was a release and I don't see any notes on it. He always reads the change log, so he goes and has to manually diff it, finds the bug or the malicious code, and it gets reported that way. So I think that's an awesome tool to help people who do have, especially when you're in compliance environments where you need to have a greater understanding of the dependencies that we have and the dependencies on the dependencies. So it's interesting. It's something that we just kind of, in this day, we need to be aware of. And so, yeah, it's an awesome tool. Appreciate that addition.
Yeah, absolutely. So security is definitely extremely important in projects like Hex. So this diff command was one of the aspects. We have some ideas for improvements to do that as well. Like, for example, instead of specifying 2 versions, it would be smart enough to know, you are already using this version, and maybe test against the latest possible version or the version that you would be able to update to, provided your version constraints, stuff like that. And hey, if anyone listening wants to help on that, that would be fantastic.
So if people are interested in contributing to Hex.pm or Hex docs or anything like that, where's the best place for them to go? Where would you direct them?
I would say just go to the issue tracker and open an issue if you want to add something. But definitely look at the existing issues. So we try to keep pretty much everything around Hex is open source, and the communication is also mostly in the issue tracker. There is also a Hex Slack channel on the Elixir Slack, so that's a good place to ask questions as well. But I would say look at the issue tracker or add more issues if you run into any troubles, and we would be happy to help.
Awesome. Great. Well, let's move to picks. Eric, do you have something you can share?
Yeah, so I help co-organize a small unconference called ResFest. I actually got a shirt on today, but no one else can see that. So it's a small unconference of 50 people or less in Greenville, South Carolina, where we talk about all things web API in a pretty chill environment. So you don't need to do REST. GraphQL is more than welcome. SOAP, if you're still using that. Anything web API related is cool to come and chat. We've actually got a small growing Elixir like set of people, which was really cool. Last year I went, I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing Elixir. And then like 3 people walked over. I was like, whoa. Because there's a lot of like more enterprisey folks that attend because their big companies are doing web APIs and whatnot. So it's cool to hear Elixir is getting out there. So that's restfest.org.
Nice. Michael.
All right, 2 quick picks this week for me. So first off, I'll drop a link to a video. This comes from Codebeam STO this year, Codebeam Stockholm. And there was a great talk on someone who is doing a re-implementation of the beam in Rust. And it's a very entertaining talk. He's very much realistic about the fact that the purpose of this isn't to try to replace the beam anytime soon, but it is an exploration. And again, I think it goes along with a theme that we've heard in the Elixir community, which is it's okay to try to reinvent the wheel if you're exploring. Like if your purpose is to learn and to push the boundaries, to try something new, that's great. And this project very much fits into that. And he's a very good presenter, does a great job of kind of poking fun at his own project a little bit here and there. So highly recommend that. And the GitHub repo behind the project is also open source and has a lot of issues and things where you can kind of follow along with what he was doing. It's a good read. And then also there is a Hex package, speaking of Hex.pm, called Veritaserum. And it does some text analysis to try to gauge whether or not a given message is relatively positive or whether it's relatively negative. And I had an idea recently around like a chat bot that watches out for if people on your team are having a bad day, and it can just remind them of some of the good things that have happened recently on the team, because I think all of us can sometimes just be unreasonably down in the dumps about things. We all have that cognitive bias that the negative feedback sometimes resonates more inside of our brains than positive feedback. And so I was kind of playing around with this idea of like injecting some more positive things when needed. And this package looked great. It was like a great place to start, and it didn't require any reading about machine learning or GPU instances on AWS to get it running. So a big hat tip to the people behind Veritaserum.
Have you considered building the bot such that if it continues to see lots of negative stuff and doesn't have a big pool of positive things to remind people about, it begins to become negative and remind people about bad things?
I didn't consider that, but maybe it would just start to rage quit. It would just like the table flip emoticon, start posting that all over.
Yeah, it sounds like science is all I'm saying.
Awesome. Josh, how about you?
All right, so I'm going to say it's 2 picks, but the second pick involves a few URLs, so there you go. The first thing is this article on how Dart deploys code in 50 milliseconds. And I came across this in the past, I guess, week. And it's kind of a programming language and deployment environment and development environment and feature flags built in at the language level and continuous delivery all in one package, which is a strange thing. And I have no idea if it's long-term valuable, but it's really neat that someone's doing it. So if nothing else, the blog post is really interesting to read. So that's number one. The second one is generally the concept of capabilities-based programming or capabilities-based security. And the first I heard of it was in this language called E. And the reason I was thinking about it recently is because Fuchsia's, which is Google's new Android replacement operating system, actually has capabilities sort of at the foundational operating system level. And I thought that was a very cool thing. And so those are 2 nifty advances in computering, I think, that I saw this week.
I have not heard of Darklang. That is interesting. I'll have to check that out. All right. And for myself, I'm excited to announce my new website. It is thinkingelixir.com. It is for online courses. So if you are an individual starting out with Elixir, I understand the challenges of being new to immutable data types and functional programming, and the challenges of needing to change the way you think. And if you are on a team of Elixir developers and you're trying to hire new people and they probably don't have Elixir skills already, and you need a quick way to help bring them up to speed, that's what this is for. So currently I'm launching the first course, which is on pattern matching, and it is a free course, and additional courses are in the works. So I would love to have people jump in, and as they get involved, I'd love to hear feedback and help guide future courses and making sure I'm able to address all the concerns that people are encountering on their journey with Elixir. So that's it for me. Wojtek, what about you?
I have 2 picks. The first Elixir pick is a talk given by Saša Jurić called The Soul of Erlang and Elixir. And I would say that if you are already using Elixir, working with Elixir, you probably know most of these things already that he talks about. But I would say it is one of the best, if not the best, talk about introducing Elixir to people that haven't heard about it, or to CTOs and such. So I highly recommend watching this talk, even if you already know Elixir. I think Saša does a fantastic job. Did a fantastic job on this talk, and I would spread the word, because I think he really distilled a lot of great features of the platform into a talk. So yeah, highly recommend it. My second pick is a little thing that I did a while ago, which is remapping caps lock to escape. And I think a lot of people already did that, like with the touch bar laptops and stuff like that. But the twist here is that also what I do is, so when I press the caps lock, it acts as an escape. But when I hold it, it acts as control key. And so some keyboards support that on the hardware level or the firmware level. You can also use software like Carabiner elements to do that. But I highly recommend this, because then by doing this, you basically have less movement of your hands, and so less chance of error sign and stuff like that. And honestly, it's super easy to get used to it, and I feel like it's just way more comfortable than otherwise. And caps lock is pretty much useless unless you shout on the internet.
Yeah, and to be a good net citizen, you shouldn't be doing that. That is interesting, the idea of determining the difference between a long press and a short press on the keyboard. It's cool.
Yeah, so actually there was even an old Lisp keyboard. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but they also had that thing where if you press the shift, it acts as shift. If you just tap on it, the left shift is for the left parentheses, which I guess would make sense to optimize power.
With Lisp, everything is parentheses, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Wojtek, it was awesome talking with you today. If people want to get in touch with you or follow you online, where should they go to do that?
You can find me on Twitter at Wojtek Mach, also on GitHub. Feel free to reach out. My DMs are open. You can also find me on IRC and Slack, pretty much using the same username everywhere.
Great. Eric, if people want to get in touch with you, where should they go?
I'm on Twitter at Eric Oestrich.
Michael, how about you?
I'm Ries, kind of all around the internet, GitHub and Twitter and stuff like that. So just remember, Ries.
And Josh?
I am Neuter, Knewter, because I was 14 once, and that's funny. You can go there and follow me if you want to get mad about the way that I feel about things.
And I am at Brainlid on Twitter and Brainlid on GitHub and brainlid.org on my blog. So yeah, you can get in touch with all of us that way. We'd love to hear ideas for the show, feedback on the show. But that's it. We hope you've enjoyed our episode today and our talk, and we hope you'll join us next week on Elixir Mix.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN.